Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Going to share some highlights about the full moon in Capricorn and just have a look at some of the other energies that are actually transpiring at the moment. So, I guess the first thing is that this cycle of the moon began with the solar eclipse, which was in Gemini just 2 weeks ago. Solar eclipse energies are always active for quite some time. So even though we're about to step into a full moon in Capricorn, which will of course highlight the attributes and characteristics of what a full moon in Capricorn highlights, connecting to other cycles of things, which I'll point to in a minute when I bring up the chart, we're still actually in the energy and the portal really of the solar eclipse energy. I guess the first thing that I want to share is something that I read online from another astrologer actually, and I just want to actually read word for word what he's written. And his name is Philip Lindsay, and he's an esoteric astrologer, and I love a lot of his work actually. And he's just written something really clear and powerful just about the sun's ingress into Cancer, which is the solstice, right? So in the northern hemisphere it's the summer solstice, and for us in the southern it's the winter. And there's a whole level of conversation and debate around that regarding the zodiac and so forth, but I'm not going to discuss that today. So here's what he says: the sun has just entered the sign of the Great Mother today. The Great Mother is Cancer, isn't it? The solstice. So solstice, which basically literally means the sun standing still, right? So when we have the equinoxes, which are March and September, equinox is equal day, equal night, right? And solstice is when the sun appears to stand still, okay? Um, and so the sun appears to stand still for around about 3 days, having reached its maximum declination between the equator and the ecliptic. So imagine the ecliptic is where the zodiac is, right? The tropical zodiac that we work with in tropical zodiac astrology. So as the sun is traveling on its path, just very quickly, there's this, we can talk about this in greater length and depth, but just very quickly, the sun has reached a point in the heavens at the moment where it's at its highest sort of maximum peak in the northern hemisphere. And so it's been climbing, if you like, this journey for the last 6 months, right? And so now it's reached its actual maximum point of what's the word I'm thinking? I've just forgotten the word. It might come to me as I continue. Anyway, it's reached that maximum point of height, and now it's going to start declining in its journey, right? So it spends half the year climbing to get to that highest point, and then it spends the next half of the year actually starting to decline. So it gets lower and lower and lower in its journey relative to the ecliptic and as it moves through the zodiac signs. So, I mean, it's been spoke that the solstice has been something that has been celebrated for eons. That there's so many rituals and beliefs and ceremonies and celebrations and sacred practices, and Stonehenge, in the UK, in England, one being a universal sort of knowing or understanding to some degree of its existence, at least, right? And just the different sorts of practices and rituals that have been practiced for a very long time. So it's it is without question a very powerful spiritual portal opening. It's almost like, well, I wouldn't even say almost. It's many things, but one thing it certainly is there's a the veil, if you like, is very thin during this time. So there's an incredible opening of the mother, the spirit, the mother, um, opening us up to be able to connect with, receive, embody energy, messages, information, not from the left linear brain, not it's got nothing to do with the left linear mind. It's really an embodied experience, because during this time, because of the opening that happens, that the portal that opens up, it it creates this space in this room for us to receive, from the archangels, from our spirit guides, from spirit itself. There's a really powerful sensitivity and opening that's going on. And there's a shift that's going on. There's a big shift. And I'll just read a few more comments here, which will explain this a little bit further. So the four cardinal cross signs, which are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, are basically reset points. And these points, don't forget, are the primary component of the Western tropical zodiac that we use. They correspond to the seasons, right? So they are reset points throughout the year where the experiences of each quarter are assimilated and consolidated. And he says that here is an opportunity for us to actually stand still. Just like the sun appears to stand still, it is an opportunity for us to just stop, reflect, and stand still. There is great power in that those are just not words or ideas. That needs to be a practice for all of us. And with the sun ingressing into Cancer and the solstice, it's a reminder to practice that and to step out of the external reality, what is otherwise known as Maya, an illusion, and so forth. It is an illusion and it's not an illusion. It's a bit of a conundrum because it is real that you are in this physical body, right? Anyway, that's another complex subject. Okay, so the solstice in Cancer is a doorway into birthing what began in Aries, okay, which was on the 21st of March, which is the true new year, at least the astronomical new year, right? The beginning of the new year, he was just saying that there, spiritually speaking, is your New Year's resolution, if you like, which was initiated when the sun ingressed into Aries, 0 degrees Aries, 21st of March. And we're at a sort of almost like a midpoint, if you like, and we're being given a reminder, if you like, of what was initiated during the ingress of the sun in Aries, right? The true beginning of the true new year. And so whatever was initiated then, we've reached a point now where we can give birth to what was initiated, perhaps. But it requires actually not necessarily an action, as it were. It requires more of a reflective moment of standing still and actually, just really reflecting on the last 6 months. What's been happening for you over the last 6 months? What was initiated? Where do you stand in that now? How has it manifested? What does it look like for you now? It's a really beautiful time to reflect on all these things at the moment. And so what else does he say? Aries, the beginning of the new year. Yes, okay, we already said that. As the sun is a measurer of time, and as time is an illusion, especially when the sun appears to stand still, that's the solstice. It appears to stand still, right? The solstice period is an opportunity to transcend the illusion of linear time, which corresponds to our left brain, Mercury. And Mercury is very shortly about to go direct. And during this full moon, it actually will be direct, in which the whole world is immersed. So let me just start that sentence again so it makes sense. When the sun appears to stand still, the solstice period is an opportunity to transcend the illusion of linear time, in which the whole world is immersed, to move into no time, now time, the eternal now, into the deepest recess of the heart. I really love what he's written here. I just think it's a very eloquent and clear articulation of the meaning of solstice, actually. So I just wanted to share that because I thought that was very beautifully written. So thank you to Philip Lindsay for that. And someone just emailed me and asked me, do I receive newsletters from Lindsay? I don't, but I actually am friends with him on Facebook. So occasionally I get to see, what he writes and shares and so forth. Okay, so I'm just going to close that page down. And just something else, I found another article which is written again about the solstice, and it's an article that focuses very much on Stonehenge. And there's a number of different components to this article which really draw from the esoteric teachings, but there's just one little paragraph that I really love here, and hopefully it will make sense. But where it's sort of this comment or this paragraph that I'm going to read is right at the end of the article, and what it's, my understanding at least, what it's essentially trying to encapsulate and remind us of is the soul, the eternity of the soul, the eternal essence, yeah, of the soul. And through our physical incarnation and or incarnations, the various journeys that are experienced through trials and tribulations, growth, pain and suffering, joy, ecstasy and misery, the whole spectrum is there for all of us. No one does not experience any of those things at different points in their life and in incarnations, right, through their evolutionary path. But when we are born into this physical vessel, it's like we have spiritual amnesia, because the nature of reality, which is so dense, which is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn rules density, form, structure, is such that it eludes us into believing the game that we see out there, and that's all there is to it. And indeed, that is not the whole picture, of essence and spirit and the infinity of soul and spirit. And so it is up to us to consistently practice some kind of remembering of our true nature, which is infinite, and to be aware constantly that no matter what happens, no matter what we go through, no matter what we create, no matter what we have, no matter what we don't have, none of it is permanent. None of it. And the same moment never returns again. This moment right now will never return again. So this whole thing about spiritual amnesia, if you like, when we enter into this physical vessel, I'll just read what it says here. There is a road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inward only and closes fast behind the neophyte for evermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is reward past all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come. I really loved the way this was articulated and put together. And perhaps I'll put a link to this article underneath this video, because some of you might be interested in actually rereading that and actually looking at the whole article. It's really great. So when I was reading that, and when I was also looking at Philip's comments and having my own sort of reflections about the solstice, and there was another thing that came through, which was Father's Day being celebrated in the Northern Hemisphere on the Sunday that just passed, which was the 20, was almost the 21st of June, so right on that solstice point. And another astrologer who's also an astronomer was pointing to the sun ingressing into Cancer, being at its highest point on a Sunday, and Father's Day corresponding to that, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. And I thought that was a wonderful sort of coincidental, if you like, understanding or insight about Father's Day, meaning that in the Southern Hemisphere, we have Father's Day in September. Now, someone wrote a message on my community wall and said, well, in some parts of the Southern Hemisphere, we actually celebrate it in June. So that was an interesting point that I wasn't aware of. But regardless of that, I liked the correlation between the sun being at its highest point, Sunday, 21st of June, and connecting to Father's Day, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, that may not necessarily fit when you start to kind of bring in other things, such as in other parts of the Southern Hemisphere, it's also celebrated in June. So I appreciate that for you who made that comment. But that was just a little moment of discovery for me, and it was very important to me because of just how very close I am with my father, and how much I miss him actually. And yeah, Father's Day is just a really difficult time for me. So even though it's not Father's Day here in the parts of the Southern Hemisphere, I was seeing Father's Day posts all over the place. So it triggers certain things within me. And anyway, it was a nice moment, if anything. It was just a nice moment and just a nice kind of reminder, pointing to something that I hadn't considered actually. Okay, so full moon in Capricorn, let's get into that. Just one other thing I discovered, which I thought was really cute as well, the glyph of Cancer. You all know the glyph, which looks like the number 69 on its side, right, is also significant from the point of view of it's sort of showing us the sun's movement. It's spending half of the year moving that way, and then it's spending the other half of the year moving in the opposite direction. So the glyph actually corresponds to that as well. It's so fascinating to me that with the language of astrology, it's such a deep and complex language, and it's like unlocking codes, and that's one of the reasons I love astrology so much. It's so mystical and so deep and so complex, and as I said, it's like unlocking different codes, and just discovering new things all the time. So again, we never, absolutely never know everything, and no one knows everything. And I think that that's a very it's a really honest and important thing to recognize for all of us. If we knew everything, then why would we be here? What would be the point? There would just be no point at all. Okay, so let me just bring up the chart and just unpack a couple of things here. So this chart is drawn for the Southern Hemisphere in Melbourne, Australia. There's the full moon in Capricorn. This journey of the moon cycle began at the solar eclipse in Gemini, as I said before. And as you can see here, Mercury has now moved direct. This Mercury retrograde has been phenomenal. I'll say it again. It's just been unbelievable in so many ways. But I mentioned in one of my recent videos, that there will be a lot of things that people will be reconsidering. And I mentioned the component of siblings as well, because first of all, Mercury is the planet that connects to siblings, and Gemini is the archetype that connects to siblings as well. And so Mercury in Gemini, I think for many people, and it has been that for me as well, has brought up a lot of matters that have needed to be really reconsidered relative to, let's just put it very simply and say, certain relationships you have with siblings, right? With certain family members. So if that has been the case for you, I'd like to hear from you. I'd be interested to hear your experience. It's been very powerful for me. So Jupiter in Pisces is now retrograde, and we've spoken about that briefly. But again, I will do a separate video for this. Mars is approaching his opposition to Saturn, and I've done a whole video on this because this alignment forms a square to Uranus as well. Just one thing, though, that I'd like to add here, and if you haven't seen the video on Saturn opposite Mars square Uranus, it's there on my channel, so you can view that anytime you like. But one thing I completely forgot to mention, which just occurred to me today as I was looking at things, is that this opposition of Mars to Saturn, an opposition means that the faster moving body, in this case being Mars, out of Mars and Saturn, Mars is the faster moving body. So Mars has been traveling around the zodiac and it's gotten to a point where it's opposite Saturn, right? But relative to Saturn, it began with a conjunction to Saturn, didn't it? Right? It had to, right? So the conjunction to Saturn, I had a look, was actually in April of 2020. And I think that's a very important key to consider when you are thinking about what's being highlighted for you at the moment relative to Mars Saturn matters in your life, which is very much around the nature of your reality, your responsibilities, your duties, your external world, and how you relate to that, and how you engage with that relative to the actions and the initiative component within you that wishes to start certain things, or actualize or activate or act on certain matters. So this cycle of Saturn opposite Mars, because it began in April of 2020, it will be important to reflect back in your own life and just see what, because the Saturn Mars conjunction, first of all, wouldn't have been an easy energy. Saturn Mars energies are always extremely challenging, particularly in hard aspects. And a conjunction is, it can be said to be a hard aspect, absolutely. But more than anything else, it's an energy that's largely unconscious and creates infinite possibilities. A conjunction is very, very powerful for that reason, because anything can be born out of a conjunction, and you don't know what it's going to be until you experience the journey of, for example, Mars Saturn. As I said, it began at the conjunction in April 2020. Then it would have had its square when Mars was in Taurus, right? So, and that would have been the first quarter square. So that would have been like the first testing ground of, it's called crisis in action, the first quarter square. So it's a little bit like experiencing really intense energy, wanting to kind of really push through on certain things, not knowing at all what the consequences or outcome may be, but feeling very intense in that process and journey, but experiencing a lot of backlash or pushback from the external environment, Saturn. But it's a testing sort of field and ground, right, as it were, in terms of what you are creating. And then as Saturn continues to move through the zodiac, which it has, and now it's gotten to Leo, it's actually opposite Saturn. So now you're in the heart of the light of it. You are seeing, you should be able to see more clearly through illumination. That's what an opposition is. It's illumination. That's why this full moon is going to illuminate a lot of these matters to us. You can see now what was initiated in April 2020, and then some months later, quite a few months later, what was happening when Mars was square Saturn. And now, while it's opposite or approaching its opposition, you're able to get a clearer perspective of what you've been trying to create and what may indeed need to be disregarded or where you may need to just sort of stand back and take view of the bigger picture. That's what an opposition does. It enables us to take sort of a step back and view the bigger picture, because everything is highlighted, it's illuminated. That's what an opposition is. So they're just some further thoughts to consider about the Mars Saturn. Um, so yeah, Mercury is now direct. Interestingly enough, during this full moon, it's on that same degree where it stopped. So it's moving very slowly, in other words. It hasn't really quite picked up momentum yet. So I still think there's going to be quite a bit of changing of minds and shuffling things around and a change of ideas and so forth. But uh, we will be able to start to progress forward, perhaps with the things that we have been considering more on an intuitive level. Remember when I spoke a little bit a while ago about Mercury retrograde in evolutionary astrology functions a little bit like Jupiter, because it takes us into the right brain intuitive faculty. It's turning within, right? Mercury turning within is it's trying to actually process things from the intuitive faculty. Now that's not the way Mercury normally functions, and certainly in Gemini, it's just eager to spit out its ideas and its communication. But through the retrograde process, it's gone through all sorts of layers and dimensions that have been quite complex, particularly due to the square that it had to Neptune. And that square to Neptune is going to come up again one more time. That's a little bit down the track. But nevertheless, Mercury has now started to proceed forward, and we'll be able to get a clearer perspective around what are the processes that we have intuitively been churning over and processing and working through. I've had unbelievable things have happened with this Mercury retrograde in my own personal life. I don't really care to discuss the details to that, but I can tell you they're very profound moments of things that impact my life in pretty significant ways. And there's been a change of a complete, 180 um, change of somebody else's perspective on something that does impact my life. So anyway, it's been really interesting, but it's still a little bit unclear to me. So I'm waiting for this Mercury to really step into its momentum of really starting to um, move slightly quicker in its normal sort of pace. Because as I said, it's 16 degrees here, which is the degree that it stopped at. Okay, so it's still moving very slow. Um, the full moon in Capricorn is an interesting full moon because we've just had the solstice, the full moon in Capricorn, and the sun in Cancer. It's really just pointing to our inner life, Cancer, our own sort of self identity. I like to think of it is very much our self identity, but I like to think of it a lot more from a spiritual perspective. At least it's very much our inner soul life. And Capricorn is basically our external self and external life. So I guess the full moon in Capricorn, it is squaring Chiron. It's a wide square, but I still consider it to be there. And we know that Chiron always points to the things that have hurt us quite deeply, whether that's through relationships or family connections. It's usually through those sorts of experiences. It can be many other things as well, of course. But what are the things that we need to further work on in ourselves from the point of view of our own identity? Again, Chiron in Aries. And Chiron is always it's always about experiencing some kind of rejection, something that doesn't frequently get mentioned when Chiron is talked about, when it is talked about, because a lot of astrologers don't even talk about Chiron. But the most typical thing that you hear about Chiron is the wounded healer. And yes, he was a wounded healer, but where did his first wound occur? A lot of people think that his wound occurred from the arrow that was shot towards his ankle, or his calf, that area of the leg there. But in fact, that wasn't his first wound. His first wound was the rejection from both of his parents, the abandonment from both of his parents. So Chiron matters always show where we experience a sense of rejection through a particular experience we have. So the Chiron squaring this full moon is not necessarily an easy energy, because it could highlight some things where we've been, I mean, it could be positive from the point of view of at least highlighting to us where we have been working on those deeper wounded components within us, where we may have been engaging in certain relationships where perhaps there wasn't a reciprocal love, taking place, or care or nurture or consideration or whatever it may be. And so the Chiron's reminding us to step into our own self, Aries, and heal those wounds around there within ourselves that we feel. And so the square to this full moon, because it's a full moon, and full moon always illuminates, highlights, amplifies, um, gives you awareness, shows you, what's been hidden, if you like. And with the Chiron squaring it, it can show you perhaps where you have healed, where you have done some quite profound work on yourself, or it could show you some further work that you still need to do. And the work is going to be relative to this full moon cycle, at least. It's very much connected to your soul, inner life, and your external self and external life and external reality. And it is a journey of, because this, we could say the Saturn Pluto conjunction, when it was in Capricorn, which kicked off this narrative of reality that we are all experiencing. All of us are experiencing some part of the narrative of reality in very similar ways, because no one is exempt from what's taking place. And so a lot of the a lot of the fears, anxieties, uncertainties, the things that came up for us when this first kicked off might actually just be amplified during this time as well, because we are still dealing with it. And a full moon in Cancer Capricorn, highlights those components of our life. How am I feeling safe, secure? Um, how am I containing and nurturing that part of myself, regardless of the external reality? And also, how am I dealing with this external reality? What does this structure of reality actually look like for me relative to the circumstances that are going on? So it is highlighting these sorts of matters, and it will bring up some past sort of residue of things that um, haven't been resolved or worked through. And I think that's going to be the Chiron also squaring that sun moon. Um, but because Chiron has that healing component to it, it can also be a process where we can step into greater healing that we need to attend to within ourselves. Because we've been sort of pushed through this global situation, since very early 2020, and now we're in the middle of 2021. So for the last, almost 18 months, we've sort of, it's like, as much as there are many different layers and levels to this relative to people's beliefs and perceptions, whether they are consensus reality or otherwise, regardless of all of those components, I still feel in my heart and soul that there is a bigger thing happening here, and it's beyond conspiracy beliefs, and it's beyond the consensus reality beliefs. It's beyond the government. It's beyond all that sort of stuff, and it's got to do with the earth, Mother Earth herself, and it's also got to do with divine source creation consciousness to all things, and just the shift that needs to happen relative to our evolution and collective evolution as well. Um, so there was a thought there, and it's just sort of gone. Let me see if it comes back. I've just lost it. Okay, well, I'll have to continue and hopefully it'll come back. Um, yeah, so yeah, Moon in Capricorn highlighting perhaps the new structures we've had to create in our life, and the old structures that we've had to let go of as well. And that's been, Saturn in Aquarius is creating a new paradigm of reality through the archetype of Aquarius, right? And don't forget, Aquarius in evolutionary astrology is ruled by Uranus. And Aquarius does have that side to it where not as much as, of course, Uranus does, but it still has that um, those characteristics that correspond to trauma, and unexpected and sudden things, you know, suddenly sort of occurring, right? And, an example would be, and this is also very much Uranus in Taurus, but it can also be Saturn in Aquarius, but it's certainly the square between them. Here in Melbourne, we've had some serious storms that created floods, and I know that this stuff's happening all around the world in various ways, but I'm just speaking of the context around the country in which I live in, right? And so these storms created a few people died. People have been without electricity for a couple of weeks now, and some will be without electricity for over a month. You just wouldn't think that that could even happen in this day and age with the level of technology that we have. It just sort of seems so unbelievable to me. But electricity is ruled by Uranus, and Uranus is in Taurus, which is what? It's our security. It's literally our needs, our daily needs on an everyday level. And of course, Saturn in Aquarius also corresponds to technology and things of that nature, right? So anyway, there's quite a few layers of things that sort of unfold and unpack. But honing it right back into ourself with regards to this full moon, it is about reflecting on the new reality that we've had to, I suppose, embody or understand, even with the level of uncertainty that still exists, and how we've had to restructure our external life, Moon in Capricorn, and our inner life, Sun in Cancer, and where we may still be carrying a lot of pain around either what we've lost or what we've had to let go of, what we've had to adjust to, and what we've had to change. Chiron squaring the sun and the moon. It's a square, so it's going to bring up the sore spots, the sensitive spots within us, about how we are dealing with and nurturing and sustaining our inner life, soul life, and how we are dealing with the harshness of reality as it appears, Moon in Capricorn, squared off by Chiron. So those are the things that I think that are strongly highlighted. And again, as I said, it goes back to, what really started early 2020 with the Pluto Saturn conjunction. Full moon in Capricorn can just amplify some of those matters that are still not resolved for many people for various reasons. The word that has been used consistently throughout this pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, has been unprecedented, right? We live in unprecedented times on every single level relative to the extremity of changes and adjustments that we've all had to accommodate in our own life, and we've all had to accept whether we like it or not. And there are still levels within that where we still have power to make certain choices, and some of us are exercising our rights on those levels, and others of us are making different choices, and that's okay. It's each to their own relative to what you feel is truth for you, what you feel is right for you, and that will be very different for every single one of us. And there's no right or wrong in any of it, regardless of what we may think, regardless of our personal opinion and judgment on the way in which others think or behave or act on things. I'll say it again, it's none of your business. It's none of my business what somebody else does or thinks of you. Our responsibility is to ourselves, of course, to our family and things like that. I know that. But the primary sort of duty and responsibility we have is to our own consciousness, awareness, and evolution, and attending to that. Never mind what Jack and Joe are doing. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what you are doing. So, where do you stand in all of this? Where is the full moon in your birth chart, by the way? Because those houses where the Cancer and Capricorn are, that's the area of where the full moon is being activated, of course. Where is the Saturn square Uranus activated in your chart? Where is the Mercury in Gemini in your chart? The location of these frequencies is going to then draw in the locality of where these things are, where these energies, phenomena, archetypes are being activated in your life, right? So those are just some thoughts to think about. And also during this full moon, Venus has just passed her opposition to Pluto. And I've just done a video on Pluto opposite Venus. Pluto opposite Venus and Venus trine Neptune, that's right. And so you can listen to that if you want to hear more about Pluto, Venus, Neptune elements or components. But I think it's important that Pluto, Venus are in this opposition. She's only just passed the opposition relative to this full moon cycle, because that's got to do with very deep transformations of old structures, Pluto in Capricorn, Venus in Cancer, with our own personal values and what provides a sense of safety and security deep inside ourselves. Venus in Cancer. What are the values that we've had to transform? Very personal values, Cancer, that we've had to transform, Pluto, in order to adjust to this new reality, Saturn, and this new paradigm, Saturn in Aquarius. So these are some of the themes that are being highlighted as well during this full moon. Okay, that thought that I had before hasn't come back. Never mind. Yeah, okay. I'm going to leave it there because I've got some work to do. This is probably not that important right now, but so there's the Sun, Cancer opposition, full moon in Capricorn. There's Pluto opposite Venus. There's Uranus square Saturn. There's Mercury gone direct. Jupiter retrograde. Mars opposite Saturn. So these are the themes, the archetypal themes and energies that we are feeling through this full moon. So it's not just a full moon in Capricorn, and also, pardon me, the square from the moon to Chiron and Chiron to the sun, right? So you can see there's a lot of dynamics occurring here. Nothing occurs in isolation, nothing. Everything is intricately connected. And one of the benefits of astrology is understanding these archetypes, the planetary themes that are emphasized at any given moment, and how they may be speaking to us and highlighting to us the very things that we are ready for, and need to receive relative to our soul's awakening and evolution. And I say awakening because, like I said at the very beginning of this video, uh, we all kind of come in with what fundamentally becomes spiritual amnesia, and we just get caught up in the web of the world, the material plane, and it for many people it just takes over. It takes over everything, and so we forget our true nature and who we really are, and we forget that we are infinite. As Jeffrey Wolf Green calls it, immutable consciousness is what the soul is. So that basically means that the soul can never be destroyed, but only change form through the identity that it takes on through every incarnation. It's a really beautiful time to remember that with the solstice, to remember that regardless of the pain and suffering and loss and things that we go through that are, excruciating at times, whatever the case may be, um, we we are infinite, and we are, in truth, we are all one as well. We are all going to return to the same sphere where we emerged from, and we will all, come back again. And so the sense that I get is that when we go what I like to call back home, which is the spirit world, the soul world, whatever you want to call it, the it's kind of uncanny because the grievances and the darker things that people project onto one another through this physical reality are just totally non-existent in those other realms. Yet on the other hand, there is a philosophical model and teaching through Rudolf Steiner, esoteric teachings, where this is very complicated, and I probably won't be able to do it justice right now, but I'll just make a couple of comments about it. There's 7 worlds, right? And part of that is connected to when the soul incarnates into the physical body, it goes through all these spheres, and those spheres are actually the planets. And the moon, being the last planet, if you like, relative to where the soul is descending from, it comes through the moon and incarnates through the moon, if you like. And so the moon is as far as we understand, it's the closest body to Earth, right? And so it's not a coincidence that the soul passes through all the spheres, planets, and then the last one is the moon, which is the closest one to the Earth. And so that's why the moon as well corresponds to the emotional body, but it also corresponds to all the systems and rhythms inside us that dictate and drive and motivate a lot of our basic needs: sleep, hunger, rest, all those sorts of things. But the point that I wanted to make about this little analogy here was that it is said that when we go through those spheres, I think it's when the soul goes through Saturn, which is no surprise because Saturn is the lord of karma, the lord of time. When the soul goes through that sphere, that's the place where the soul decides what it's going to come back to meet again, or to further evolve through, or to further grow through. So that's where the soul makes the decisions, the very hard decisions that the personality and ego would never make, because the personality and ego, it doesn't want to experience pain or suffering. It doesn't want to experience loss. It doesn't want to experience not having enough. It doesn't want to experience, losing a loved one, and so on and so forth. But the soul makes those decisions before it comes into the body, and it sets up the narrative of what it's going to meet with that person, with that person, with that person, and so forth. That's why we have these experiences in life that feel destined and fated, or that feel you may meet someone. And I've had this with every partner that I've had in my life. I've had this experience, and that is that I know that soul. I remember that soul. I remember having lived with them before, and I truly, truly do. And I even know the story with every single one of them of what it was in my previous lives. Some of you may or may not believe that. It doesn't, it's neither here nor there for me. I'm just sharing something. Um, so during this solstice and with these energies at the moment, some of the things that we can reflect on are remembering actually our true infinite nature and trying to create less attachment if we can to the narratives and the storylines in our head, and the experiences that we have, because they just come and then they go. Something else will come in, that will go, and then something else will come in. We can't hang on to anything, really. And the most powerful example of that is to let go of the one that you love beyond anything. Letting go of my father when he transcended is the most excruciating, painful, difficult life experience I've ever had. There's nothing can compare to that. So we can't hang on to anything, can we? And remembering that we are infinite, we will connect with our loved ones again. We are connected with them now, but I'm talking about when we leave the body, we reconnect in a different way, on a different level, in a different sphere, with a different way of communicating, a different way of feeling. And some of the things that I've sort of come across over the last 4 years since my father's transcendence is I keep getting messages either through something I hear, something I read, or a dream, or just in some form or sense or intuitive knowing as well, is that death is actually the physical death. It's actually freedom. It's a release. That's why Jupiter, like I mentioned in a video, I think a couple of videos ago, Jupiter can be a very powerful significator when a person leaves their body. And not many people would think about that or would even know about that, because most people would think, well, it's got to be Pluto, right? Pluto represents death, transformation. But Jupiter corresponds to the freedom, the release. And what are we being released of? What are we being freed of? We're being freed of a reality that, whilst it may have its beautiful experiences and journeys, is also entangled in enormous pain and suffering on so many levels. So, just some things to think about. I'll be back soon with more, and leave any questions and comments below and share your personal journeys, experiences, and sending you all so much love for this solstice, beautiful solstice period, and the full moon in Capricorn. Don't let the full moon in Capricorn get you too down, because Capricorn at that personality level, okay, and with the nature of reality at the moment, it's a pretty heavy energy, okay? It's pretty heavy. So just be aware of that and remember who you are. Bye for now.